On Tuesdays, it's our weekly visit with ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky. And Dan did a breakdown recently on his own show, NFL Live on ESPN. We'll get to that in just a second. Dan's segment brought to you by Ellicott Hotels. Fans, round up your family, friends, or coworkers for a fantastic game day experience at 500 Pearl. Reserve your pack and book your group event today at 500pearlbuffalo.com. So you chopped it up, Dan, on your NFL Live show with your cohorts there, and you kind of outlined how Josh, for whatever reason, in the red zone, when facing pressure, wasn't going to his hot routes. And we know that Josh has a very high football IQ. Can you put your finger on why it did not happen on Sunday?
I cannot. And the interesting thing is there's 2 or 3 clips in the game where he does throw hot. That just it doesn't happen to be in the red zone. You know, that was kind of in the middle of the field play. And then in the red zone, it specifically showed up on 3 different occasions that kind of take points off the board potentially, and force field goals and field goal attempts. You know, it's interesting because when a player, I remember when Josh was coming out, me pointing to that. I remember the breakdown vividly. And I actually talked to Josh about that thing this past summer when together. And then really over the last couple of years, he's kind of gotten away from that. He's been, I remember the Miami game this year. He was really good against Miami's fire zone pressures. And then there are moments that Josh, I think, knows that blitzes are coming and decides I'll be the hot route. I'm not going to throw the hot route. I'll go make a play, and it works. And good things happen. And you sit there and be like, oh, well, it almost covers it up. And eventually, it's one of those things for Josh. It's live on the edge type, because at moments he makes guys miss and he makes a big play, and then all of a sudden all things are good. And then moments, repetitively it shows up against maybe division opponents or teams that are very well coached to pressure and not give him the opportunity to make some of those plays. We're evading guys. So I don't know necessarily why it showed up in the red zone. It's interesting to see him look at guys and then not throw it. And so I don't know if it could be a multitude of options, and these are assumptions by me. 1, he's decided to go make a play. 2, he doesn't know he's hot. He's surprised by it. 3, he doesn't trust that the hot route runner is going to be there and make a play on the ball. So he thinks I'll go do something. So it's assumption on my end to know why he didn't do it. I just know that he didn't do it in those moments, and it hurt their offense. It hurt their performance.
So we've been taking calls all week, Dan, about the offense and getting off to slow starts. Certainly in the fourth quarter against the Giants and last week against the Patriots, they kind of came to life, put together a nice sustained drive and covered a lot of ground. And everybody's trying to figure out how to get the offense to do that earlier. And you can give us some ideas, perhaps. A lot of people say, let's go no huddle, spread it out, throw it down, have some go fast-paced, get some success. And I think one of the things is, and if you go fast-paced, you risk coming off the field fast, just like throwing an interception on the first play of the game like Josh did last week.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said for early success offensively and having it lead to better things later in the game.
Totally. Yeah. That first interception he throws was head scratching as well. I think to get them to play a little bit more efficient and faster. So I don't know if they're doing this. They very well could be doing this. But if you go and look at the teams offense wise that just usually start really good, they obviously have their first 15. The places that I've been around, they would do 2 things in those first 15 that were always really good. Number 1, they would get into very specific formations that they had seen other teams have success with against that defense and try to attack some of the flaws of that defense. I remember being with Gary Kubiak, and if we played the Indianapolis Colts, and the week before the Colts had played like the Titans, and the Titans, were getting into 12 personnel and running duo, which is a double team run. Well, Kubiak would be very focused on, okay, in our first 15, we want to get into a 12 personnel look. Maybe that's not our specialty and our strength, but I know that that defense is struggling to handle that. So he would get into some form of 12 and he would maybe shift to it or motion to it or, get it out of a certain, gun look or reverse the handoff, whatever, to get to that end play, and really trying to focus on attacking a defense in the things that they're vulnerable to on tape. I don't know if Buffalo is doing that or not, and I don't know if they have coaches that are specializing that. My guess is yes, but that's something that in your first 15, you absolutely can do. And again, maybe it's not your identity, but you're trying to attack the things that they've shown as flaws. And then I think the second thing is gathering information. I don't know if enough teams do that. When we get into this group in this situation, what are they doing? What do we have to get to? Instead of just calling plays, I always say that there's a difference between calling plays and calling games. Kyle Shanahan's the best in the world at it, or Andy Reid's the best in the world at it. They get into plays and formations and looks, and they do it for, obviously they want success, but they're really trying to get into the third or fourth play that they really want. Like they really want to, have the chance to throw, a deep cross or a big post or a big in, but they don't want to call in their first 15 because they want to see if they're going to get the ideal look given personnel grouping and or formation and situation. And that's something that maybe Buffalo, again, they might be doing that, but if not, for sure need to do it more.
So, Dan, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago when you had you on, in the wake of the injuries that the Bills sustained on defense, Daquan Jones, Matt Milano, Tre'Davious White, that the burden was going to fall on their defensive front to kind of hold the fort. That sustained some injuries, too. We know Ed didn't play last week, which hurt, obviously, and it compromised their pass rush because the Bills had very few opportunities to rush Mac Jones because they were not in long down and distance situations very often. So if that continues to be a problem, and the last 3 games without those 3 defensive players in their lineup, the run defense has been grossly subpar, near the bottom of the league. What does the offense have to do to kind of create a greater margin of error for that defense? We get callers all the time, Dan, saying, hey, Josh is running less. They got to let Josh be Josh. Do you think Josh's reduced frequency in taking off with the football, there have been virtually no designed runs for him this season, do you think it's gotten to a point where opposing defenses are now saying, that's something we really don't have to worry about anymore? And now you have that extra defender to commit to other areas of your defense to stop this Bills offense.
Yes. In this specific situational football situation, and more so the designed runs, more so than the scrambling, every defense is going to be a little bit more or a little bit focused on quarterback scrambling, certainly Josh. But the designed run situations, third downs, red zones, I think teams are a little bit less focused on it because they haven't done it as much. Why? Obviously, the injury conversation. Do they need to do it more? I would say, what does this offense need to do to help the defense out? I think that the first question is Brandon Beane going to be active this next 10 days to 2 weeks, and how? Because a month ago, before these injuries, this was the best team in football. This was one of the best teams. However, I viewed them as the best team. I thought they could beat anybody. They can't right now. They're not right now. We can be honest about that. So they have to find a cover corner that can play man coverage. Is there one out there that they can go trade for? And they've got to find a better inside linebacker situation right now. The run diagnose is not showing up the way that it did with Matt Milano. Matt Milano's great. Is there a guy at the inside linebacker position that's even in that same conversation? And what's it cost you? That's the challenge, is what does it cost you for the now or for the future for right now? I think the second thing in relation to the offense is I've been a part of situations like this, where as an offense, you sit there and go, all right, I don't know if we can win unless we score 30. And I'm not saying it's that dire, because obviously there's still talent on their defense, but sometimes it can feel that way. And that changes the way you play. You become so much more overly aggressive with plays and your decision-making. You're trying to force things all the time because if you don't score, let's say 24 plus, we can't win because of the situation of defense. And that's the big challenge, is like, how How aggressive can this offense get without hurting itself to try to help the defense? And the point blank answer to the question is the only way that they can help the defense themselves is to score. And that's going to take a little bit different viewpoint of how they want to play ball.
One of the things is with them now is that Dawson Knox has had wrist surgery. He's week to week now. They're probably, we're guessing, go more 11 without Dawson Knox on the roster, or at least injured. That means Kincaid is now the tight end. You go with one back, three wides in the tight end. And they have been able to run the ball more efficiently or better out of that formation rather than out of 12 personnel. What are your thoughts on the Bills now having to juggle, now being like left-handed? You don't have the 12 personnel package like you did a week ago. You got to go 11 or 22.
Yeah. I think the 22 still has some life, and I still think their 22 can and I would say, using their fullback as a little bit of a tight end world can live in that, I would say this, because of the 11, they had some times when they get into their 4-0 or 4-1 formation, 4 guys to one side, and they run some RPOs. I would expect a little bit more of that. And that single person more often than not should be either, I would say, should be Steph. I think you put Steph by himself in those situations and you give him the chance to win some one-on-one routes. And if not, you kick the ball front side or hand it off. The interesting thing was, Steve, they got into some of those in 11 personnel and some of their 4-0 formations, and they didn't run, what I would say, they didn't run a front side RPO. They just handed the ball off instead of having a pass option on the front side. And some of my notes are like, why are we even in 4-0 if not for the opportunity to kick the ball front side? It's either hand the ball off or throw a one-on-one route backside. But, if they shade backside and then they have their linebackers stacked, the numbers advantage isn't taken advantage of. So I think a little bit more of a spread out RPO look in the 11 personnel will kind of have to show itself.
Last one here, Dan. The Bucs defense, who's on tap on Thursday night here, a little bit of a strange anomaly here statistically. They are last in the league in third down defense, but they're first in the league in red zone defense.
Yep.
How is that possible, number one? And then number two, some of the stuff you mentioned at the top with Josh in the red zone, how big of a challenge is that going to be against this group?
Big time challenge. I think that those stats might be a little bit skewed just from last week. 3 red zone fumbles by Desmond Ridder were a huge story in that game. Honestly, that game's not as close as 16-13 Atlanta, Tampa Bay of last week. There's 3 fumbles that he has. Now, one of them's at the 10-yard line, great pass rush. 2 are at the 1. So that could have been a, 2-possession game win for Atlanta. I think here's who Tampa Bay is. They're phenomenal run defense-wise. Very few teams have ran the football against them. Atlanta had a little success, but that's their bread and butter. I think that there are chunk throws against this defense that Josh and this offense can take advantage of. People are going to be sick and tired of hearing about it. You are not going to drop back chunk this team, though. You're not gonna. They're too good up front. You have to play action chunk them. That's what Desmond Ridder did a little bit. There's 3-level throws that you can get on this defense. I think the challenge for them in the red zone is this. They are a tremendous linebacker blitzing team. And with Levante David and Devin White and the way that they pressure and then drop people, 2 things will be paramount. It's going to have to be get it out quick, or it's going to have to be Josh in a one-on-one situation versus, a coverage unit that's not as good as it was during their Super Bowl run, because they will all-out pressure you. And, Josh, I would say this, when they do, you can't throw it over the middle because they will drop guys out, and there's easy interceptions there for the defense. So it's more kick the ball versus pressure to the perimeter. And then you better be ready for those blitzing linebackers because they get on you quick.
Dan, good stuff. Appreciate it. It's great talking to you. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.